What do you make of the US response to this crisis? We just heard there from Antony Blinken on his second visit to Israel in a matter of days.
Well, the U.S. has clearly activated a series of diplomatic moves, some of them in order to assure Israel of continuing U.S. support. Secretary Blinken made that clear, as did the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, when he visited Israel. We've also done some things on the ground, the movement of two aircraft carrier strike groups off the coast of Lebanon. But the fact that Secretary Blinken, after his regional tour, came back to Israel suggests that there's some very serious conversations going on, not for public consumption, related to moderating Israel's response, dealing with the humanitarian crisis, perhaps beginning discussions on a ceasefire, perhaps beginning discussions on hostage exchange, and so forth. So there's a lot of diplomacy here, and we need to watch very carefully as both the public relations side and the private diplomatic side move forward.
Yeah, I mean, the Times tonight reports that the US is readying 2,000 troops to back Israel. But as you say, there clearly is a lot of diplomacy going on behind the scenes. Antony Blinken going on from Israel to Jordan. But is there any sense in which all of those efforts from Antony Blinken and behind the scenes from President Biden himself are really going to moderate Israel's behavior?
Well, one signal that there may be some traction here is the fact that Israel has not yet gone into Gaza with a ground operation. They apparently have sent in some reconnaissance units. We may continue to see probes here and there, primarily to see if they can anticipate what Hamas has in mind should they move in on the ground. But I think the fact that we're seeing this pause suggests that Israel is giving a little time for further humanitarian efforts to succeed, but also for further diplomatic efforts to succeed. The one thing I would be pretty certain of, however, is that Israel is intent upon decapitating Hamas. And that means that there will be a war, but the question is how they'll prosecute it.
So you think that nothing will stop those Israeli troops launching this ground incursion when they feel the time is right?
I think nothing will stop Israel from going after Hamas. I don't know how large a ground incursion. I don't know what the tactical considerations will be. There has to be concern about prosecuting this fighting in such a crowded environment. But I'm very confident in saying that they're going to go after Hamas and to try to do it in a way that minimizes civilian casualties and minimizes the humanitarian distress.
What do you make of Egypt's role in all of this? You've also served in Cairo as US ambassador. There had been a lot of hopes that the Rafah crossing from Gaza into Egypt would be opened at least in a limited way, perhaps to allow out some foreign nationals, perhaps to allow in some essential humanitarian supplies. But that hasn't happened, has it?
Not yet, but I think it's still on the table, and I think it's still probably what Secretary Blinken is working. The Egyptians do not want a mass influx of Palestinians who are concerned that they're not going to be able to go home. Egypt doesn't have the resources itself to handle such a mass influx, and there has been an insurgency in Sinai for a number of years, and therefore Egypt doesn't want Hamas fighters coming into Egypt under the guise of refugees. So they want to make sure that when they do open the border, that it's primarily used for the humanitarian supply inside Gaza and for the exit of the proven foreign nationals who will move through the desert and on to Cairo and then go to wherever country they're citizens of. And so Egypt's being very careful here for its own reasons, but I think it's probably a very active part of the diplomacy.
But what that means is that the situation for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians is increasingly desperate. We were hearing here on Times Radio earlier this evening of one man who'd headed towards that southern border and was saying that the situation on the Gazan side was so desperate, with so many others who have fled their homes in Gaza City, and absolutely insufficient humanitarian supplies of even basic water or medical supplies. I mean, it does mean that there is a horrendous humanitarian crisis building up here, doesn't it?
Oh, surely. And I think all of our hearts go out to those Palestinians who are caught in the vise between Israel's desire to be rid of Hamas and Hamas's desire to use them as a kind of human shields. The problem here is there are no easy answers. If the people in Gaza remained in place, the possibility would exist that they would suffer even greater difficulties and greater problems. Israel, I think, is serious about the effort of removing as many of these innocent people from harm's way. But as you noted, and as we know, that's a very difficult problem. This is truly a Hobbesian choice that everybody needs to make. The real villain, however, remains Hamas because of what they did on October 7th, and now not encouraging people to get out of the way. I mean, the fact that Hamas has been stopping people on the roads and publicly saying they should stay tells you what kind of a movement they are.
What about these reports that President Biden himself may visit Israel, suggestions that he's cleared his diary and is preparing to go to Israel, even as the country, of course, is still on a very high state of alert, more attacks reported tonight, and as it's preparing, apparently, for this ground invasion?
Well, the president gave a very strong speech last week, as you recall, and I think there's a political element here of trying to take advantage of the fact that he's going to walk into a country that very much is in love with him right now. On the other hand, he does not want to walk into a country that, upon his arrival, launches a ground invasion of Gaza. So there's probably a lot of talk on the phone now and in other messages. If that trip is to happen, the president's not going to want to be there while there's an active ground operation. But he would be prepared to go, I think, not only to reap the political benefits, but also to continue what Secretary Blinken is doing, and that is to talk to Israel about some of these dilemmas.
And just finally, if the ground offensive does go ahead as everyone expects, and if it does lead to more horrendous loss of life, which it's very difficult to see how that can be avoided, where does that leave the US position? Does it not make it harder for President Biden and the rest of his administration to continue with such strong support for Israel?
Well, I don't think the level of support for Israel will change, but I think the dialogue with Israel and the quiet conversations that need to be had will change rather dramatically. I think they'll be tougher. There will be a very, very strong encouragement to bring an operation to a halt. There'll be efforts to find the elements of a ceasefire. But I think there's a genuine feeling in Washington, not only by the president but also by Congress, that if any country were faced with what happened in Israel last Saturday, the reaction would likely be the same. We ourselves faced 9/11, and you saw what happened. We went into Afghanistan and stayed for a very long time. So I think the feeling is Israel needs to find a way to deal with Hamas. We hope that they can do it with minimal casualties, but I don't think the United States is going to tell Israel to stop without some assurances that Hamas can't operate the way it has until now.